Welcome, everyone, to Latter Daily Digest. Today, I'm featuring a fan of the show, Summur Rayn. Summer, it's nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me on, Jean.
So, Summer, tell us a little bit about your Mormon story.
So, I was raised LDS. My mother is from Trinidad. My father is from Florida. He was raised Southern Baptist, and my mother was raised Catholic. When they got together, when they got married, my father was playing in the NFL. He's actually playing for the New York Jets when they got married, and then got traded over to the Oakland Raiders, where he met Todd Christensen and Kathy, his wife, Christensen, and Mark Wilson on the Oakland Raiders. Won a Super Bowl in 1980, but also decided to join the church in 83. So I was about 3 years old when they joined the church. So I was raised in the church. Wasn't born in the covenant. We ended up being sealed in the Washington, D.C. temple. That was the only temple really on the East Coast at that time.
So, was it a
So
year after they got baptized?
actually, it was, yes. Let me think. Sorry. My
So, you got to
sister
go,
was
you were
born
like
in
4 or 5?
83. Yes. I'm trying to think because my sister was born in 83 and she was there too. So I believe it was either a year or two after.
Uh-huh.
But I was about 4 or 5 years old when we were sealed in the temple as a family. And that was the Washington, D.C. temple. My parents, like I said, yes, we were sealed in the Washington, D.C. temple. As we grew up, we spent time on both coasts, so New York and in California during the Raiders season. But my dad retired in 83. So we moved back to New York and stayed in New York that whole time. So the DC temple was the temple we always went to. But being on the East Coast, we didn't have a lot of LDS members. It was not like Utah at all. So my sister and I, growing up, we were maybe one of five LDS members in our entire high school, kind of thing. When we moved my senior year, I was one of two, not including my sister, so one of three LDS members in my high school when I moved to a bigger high school. So we were a bit nuanced. I think too because my parents were converts. Um, I was raised more to believe that this is a way to connect with God, but not necessarily that, this is the one and true church and this is the only way, because I had family on my mom and my father's side who were not members. So it was more of this is a way to
What?
connect with God, and
Right.
it's
It's
got the
like
fullness.
your path to God and to heaven was
Absolutely. And
just a
and
different path.
Right. And we did believe that we had the fullness of the gospel, that we have the priesthood, other faiths do not, and the correct ordinances. So it wasn't that nuanced where it's like, oh, our faith is like everyone else's faith, but it was more nuanced in the sense of, if somebody is a Baptist or if somebody is just a Christian, I dated them. As I got older, my parents had no problem with me dating people who were Catholic and Baptist. It just wasn't an issue. I don't if that makes sense. It was
Yeah.
all about, are they a good person and do they believe in God?
Right. So it was inclusive
Yes.
as well as being, but we're the better way. The better way.
A- Absolutely. Yes. Inclusive, but invite them to church so they can see, the,
Yeah,
the
how things
better
are.
way. Right. So yeah, that's how I was raised. I had, of course, more non-LDS friends than LDS friends. I had more non-LDS family members. I mean, that's kind of what we were raised with, and we were raised not to judge. And so my whole upbringing was one of, Jesus loves us, God loves us. You go to church. I went to primary, I did seminary. I loved seminary. I was one of those kids on the East Coast. We all got up early, so there was no early start or during school seminary. It started at 6:30, I believe. And so I got up at 5 a.m. every morning, got ready for school because we would leave seminary and go straight to school. But I loved seminary. I loved the scriptures. I loved kind of finding student manuals and digging deep. I was always that person that wanted to have like a Hugh Nibley or a student manual or institute manual so that I could do more than just the footnotes, kind of like research and study it. So I really enjoyed that. I
Did you have leadership positions in like My Maids or Laurels or anything like that?
I did. So when I was my maid, I was secretary, and when I was a Laurel, I was first counselor. And yeah, I my experience was just I had a great upbringing. I had a great LDS upbringing. My mom was not the stereotypical Utah LDS woman. She um, was a stay-at-home mom. She but she was very independent. She always had independent thought. And I realize now looking back that she kept all of her kids in a bubble within the bubble, right? So they say there's like a Mormon bubble, but we had a bubble within that bubble. For example, I was a volleyball player through middle school and high school. I actually got a scholarship for volleyball. I loved volleyball. And I would come straight from volleyball practice to young women because if I went home, church was far. It was an hour away. So if I went straight home, I wouldn't have made it to young women. So I would show up and I had shorts that would go right above the knee. They weren't the really, really short shorts, but they would go above the knee. And that was my practice uniform with a regular shirt and my knee pads and everything. And our young women president said to me one day that if I can't change, I can't come to young women because my dress was inappropriate. Um, and I went home and I told my mom, and my mom went to the president and said, first of all, you don't speak to my daughter without talking to me. Don't ever talk to my daughter again without me present. And then she said, and be glad that she's even coming because she's coming from volleyball practice. So my mom was always our number one defender, no matter what. So I learned at an early age that just because someone has authority or a leadership position doesn't mean that they're right. Um, that you need to kind of pray about it, think about it on your own. And I learned that through my mom, 1,000%. My father was someone who he would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning just to read his scriptures every morning. And that was so that he could read his scriptures before he read scriptures with us at 5 before we went to seminary. So he was just one of those, just a pillar of a good person trying to do all he can within the church. We did not have family home evening on Mondays because he worked. So we would do it Sunday evening because he wanted to make sure that we had family home evening. So he always had a lesson. We always had something together. So I had a wonderful upbringing of what I believed was the collective Mormon experience. When I moved to Utah, I realized that we were not as strict. Like I said, um, we did family home evening on Sundays, not Mondays. And then I came out here and it's like, no, Monday evening is when you do it. So yeah,
How old were you when you moved to Utah?
I ended up meeting my husband in New York City at 29. And I moved to Utah when I was 30.
Okay,
Um,
so you didn't move to Utah when you were younger. You
so
were.
I did when I went to BYU for one semester.
Hmm.
Freshman year, I was going to study law. I just like to argue. I enjoyed it, still do. And so I was always told, you'd make a great lawyer. So I was going to go into law. And so I came out to BYU for one semester, decided to change majors to communications and work somewhere in the NFL in PR. So I transferred from BYU to Syracuse. So I did have a little bit of an experience in Utah um, when I was 18 for what, 6 months, or 5 months, but it wasn't a full experience, if that makes sense. Again, it was a bubble because I was at BYU. I stayed on campus. There were a couple of things that I really enjoyed about BYU coming from home and moving from Pennsylvania all the way to Utah. I actually enjoyed saying a prayer before class. The teacher saying, "Oh, we're about to take a test. Let's bow our heads and say a prayer that we all do well." It kind of it felt good to kind of be in that kind of setting, but I definitely am grateful that I ended up going to Syracuse and was
Mhm.
around the heathens. Just it was a different experience. It was an experience of the world, and I feel like it tested me more on who I am and what I will and will not do, because I was around people like I was all my life. People are drinking, I don't want to drink, kind of thing, instead of being in an environment where I'm being told you're not allowed to, or you have a curfew. If that makes sense. I really appreciated going to a school that I was able to test my own character and merit.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that was Syracuse. And then I ended up leaving Syracuse. I worked for the Oakland Raiders for 2 seasons in their public relations department, and then decided that I wanted to move over to community relations, which is more service and more focused on the community. So I ended up coming back home and working for the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's when Coach Reed, Andy Reid, was there. And what's interesting is I was working in the community relations department for the Philadelphia Eagles. And at the same time, Andy Reid was doing firesides with my dad.
Mhm.
And
So you're buddies with Andy Reid.
Yes, yes, it was pretty funny because I would see him at the complex, NovaCare complex, every day, and then I would see him like Saturday night at a fireside, or Sunday at state conference. So it was kind of interesting to have that dynamic that I'm seeing our head coach, but we were all really good friends with the Reeds. Somebody else that my dad would do firesides with was Vi Sekahema, who's now a
Mhm.
70. So
Yeah.
we know the Sekahemas, and love Elder Sekahema and his wife and family. Just love them. So even now, when I see Coach Reed in Kansas City, or when I run into Elder Sekahema here, it feels a little bit like home because we all were together in Pennsylvania. So yeah, so I went from the Oakland Raiders, who were as rambunctious as they've always been, to Coach Reed's Eagles, which was, he cared more about character than talent. You could be very talented, but if you were a troublemaker, if you weren't a good person, he didn't want you on his
That's
team.
right. That's the opposite of the Raiders.
Oh yeah, complete opposite. They're like, we don't care.
From just
Um,
win, baby, to just be a good person, baby.
Exactly. 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 And when I was with the Raiders, Al Davis was still alive. So I remember meeting Al Davis, and I've only been
Mr. Davis
starstruck.
to you.
Mr. Davis, exactly. I've only been starstruck twice in my whole life. Because my dad played football. I met a lot of people, and they're all great people. So I've never really stuttered or anything like that. The two people was Al Davis. When I met him, and he had found out that I was Burgess's daughter, and he knew my dad's stats from University of Miami, which was astounding. I mean, he saw me in the hallway and said, "Oh, you're Burgess Owens' daughter." And I remember I wanted him out of University of Miami, but the Jets picked him up first round, 13th overall, and I'm thinking, wow, how the guy was a
That's
genius.
right. This football
Um,
god knows my father.
I mean, it was just to remember I mean, we're in 2001 at this point, and my dad was drafted in 73. So, anyway, Al Davis was amazing. But then I went from that type of environment to the Eagles, which um, it was
Oh yeah,
just a lighter and oh,
you
go
were
ahead.
going to say a second starstruck experience. I'm all
Yes.
ears.
That was when I was with the Eagles. So with the Eagles, I'm in community relations. So I am the conduit between the community and the players. So my job was, if there was a hospital visit, I would get Donovan McNabb, check his schedule and get Donovan to go to the hospital. Or if, training camp, I would get T.O. to come to the sidelines and sign things for the kids. So I was the conduit between the two. I was always on the field before the game just to set up things. We had people, we'd walk down there. So one time I went down there before the game started. The teams were warming up, but all the announcers are on the field, and the game has not started. But everyone's on the field, and I go down there and I see John Madden, and that was my second experience. I love John Madden. Growing up, I was the little girl from Remember the Titans. I was the one that was like screaming on the sidelines and, what are you doing? Pick it up. Like that was me growing up.
Mm,
But my dad, um, I'm the oldest of six, and I have one brother, five girls, and one boy. My dad was always focused on my brother, because he could play football. We couldn't as girls. So he would never talk football with me growing up, ever. My brother was the one that he would talk football with. So my brother and I would sneak to the basement and we would play John Madden. That's what Brett and I would do all the time. And so to meet John Madden on the field was
that's
kind of
right.
like a second father kind of
Like a
situation.
video game art.
Yeah, I'm like, "You're the one who taught me football. I know what a flea flicker is because of you." So, anyway, I met him and he knew my dad too. I mentioned my dad's name. He's like, "Oh, yes, I remember. I remember when he played and all that." And then I remember I just left the stadium and I cried out in the parking lot because I was so excited. And then I came back and went to work. So that was my second experience, both football related. But yes, I
That's
was with
right.
the Philadelphia Eagles when Coach Reed was
Oh,
there. Oh, go ahead.
my
Sorry.
my semi-related experiences. I got to be on the sidelines at Stanford football games, and I got to stand next to Bill Walsh one day. So there,
Wow.
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Talk about football people.
When you meet someone who I don't know, kind of is the epitome of the
Larger than
game.
life.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You see players all the time, but when you meet people like Bill Walsh, and Al Davis, they're the epitome of what the NFL is, the epitome of what football is. So anyway, I felt the same way if I'd ever met like Paul Bear Bryant, the Alabama coach. I know I would have been the same way. But I go from, like I said, the Oakland Raiders to LDS, Coach Reed, and it was a wonderful experience. They were very focused on community, so I got a lot done there, and I was there for 3.5 seasons, and then I was waiting for the Indianapolis Colts to call me to move there, and the Continental Airlines was hiring. And my dad said, "Have you ever thought about being a flight attendant?" And I said, "No, I've never thought about it." But I applied. My mom was a flight attendant when she met my father. They actually met on an airplane. She was with Eastern. So how I became a continental flight attendant for 7 years. I got called back for the interview. I heard it was really difficult. So I ended up going to flight attendant school. And I'm just very competitive. So I didn't want them to cut me. So I kind of went through the motions and then I ended up loving it. And I did that for 7 years. And
So you
then I
learn how
met
to
my
go like
husband.
this.
Yeah, I like this and the exits. And then, there's the pull the the life
Pull the
vest.
thing down.
They don't do that now. Now they have videos, but back then,
Right.
I had my
Had to learn it
flight
all.
attendant stands and I pointed to everything. But I was international flight attendant, and I was on call for a flight to Beijing, and I decided to go try out the singles ward in New York because I was actually home. I normally, because I was so junior, would be flying on Sundays. So I would go to singles wards in other countries. So I went to the London YSA, I went to the Belfast YSA. And what I loved was that the church wasn't different, right?
It's the
So I
same
went,
everywhere.
it was the same everywhere. And to meet young people like myself in different countries, it was pretty cool. It was a lot of fun. But this Sunday I was home and I was waiting to see if I was going to get called to Beijing, China. So I said, let me go check out the singles ward in New York. And my husband had just moved from one part of Manhattan to the other part of Manhattan. And so that was his first day at that singles ward. And he kind of stalked me. He saw me in gospel doctrine. He came and sat next to me, and then he walked me to Relief Society. And then he was waiting outside Relief Society after that was done. And he said, hey, do you want to hang out after? So that's where I met my husband, was in New York in the singles ward. And fun fact, he was the first and only member of the church I'd ever dated, and I met him at 29.
Mhm.
So I was just kind of having fun as a flight attendant, and then I meet this guy, and a year later he ended up graduating, so he moved back to Utah, and I flew out to Utah and hung out with him for a little bit, and he said, hey, why don't you move out here and we'll get you your own apartment and all that. And 3 months later, we were married. So
Wow.
it was very, very quick, and I haven't left. So I stayed out here. My family were kind of all over the US, but my parents were still in Pennsylvania. I had a couple sisters there. One of my sisters at BYU, Hawaii. Um, and all of them ended up moving out to Utah. So every single one of my siblings lives in Utah now, and my parents live in Utah. So all of us, it's been a lot of fun to have them out here in Utah. So yeah, that's a little bit of my upbringing. I've got 3 kids now, and we live in Utah. Oh,
What kind of callings have you had in your Utah wards?
so my Utah wards, I have been called to do young women a lot. So in the first ward we were in, the family ward, before I had my daughter, I was the young women second counselor. And then I was moved to first counselor when we got another presidency. Then we moved to another area of Utah, and I was again put into young women, but I was the first counselor there. And after that, I became gospel doctrine teacher. Then I went back to young women. And then we moved to another ward, and I was gospel doctrine teacher there with my husband. When I was in young women in our last ward, though, we ended up being my husband and I, sorry, I said we, my husband and I ended up being doctrine teachers for the youth. So we were youth teachers when I was in young women. And then with my husband, which was a lot of fun, we taught the 17 and 18-year-olds. So laurels, I don't know what that is for the men, but when they're about to leave,
Priest.
priests. And
Mhm.
so we had a good group. We would rally those teenagers in there, and it was a lot of fun. And then we moved wards again, and I was called to young women again first. And then after that, gospel doctrine. And I was called with my husband to gospel doctrine, but we didn't teach together. We taught opposite. So I would do one Sunday, he would do the other Sunday. And then recently they pulled me out of there and they put me in primary in nursery. And I was doing that for about 4 months. And that was my most recent calling, was nursery.
That
So
was one of my last callings. But anyhow, so so this is all pre-COVID, or was COVID
pre-COVID,
any part of that?
yeah, so COVID was when I was Young Women. I was in Young Women during COVID. Um, I remember I would like drop things off to the Young Women. Then when we moved wards, I was called um, I was called to Young Women again during COVID. So even though we weren't meeting, we still held callings. So that was a little bit trickier because I was new to the ward, but we made it work, and I met some of the young women also here and there during that time. And then when we came back from COVID, we were back in person. I continued with the young women, and that's when I left young women and they put me in gospel doctrine with my husband.
Okay, so you're doing gospel doctrine, and you come upon some things, and you start to do some research,
Yeah.
and you discover some podcasts. What podcasts were those?
So initially getting into gospel doctrine, like I said, I'm a studier. Like I don't just do the bare minimum really with anything that I'm supposed to teach or study. And I was like that in school as well. It's not just with gospel things. I just like to things stick with me more when I'm able to really get to the root of things. So when I was a gospel doctrine teacher, I started watching things like Don't Miss This, which I loved, with Emily Bell Freeman, who's now a GA, General Authority, and Dave Butler. I would go to BYU Women's Conference and Time Out for Women, things like that, and they would have a lot of great podcasts that I'd learn about there, and that's where I learned about Don't Miss This. Come Follow Me Up, I think it's called. Come Follow Up was another one, and that's on BYU. So there is a lot of podcasts that I watched, but it was mostly to get more history or background or things that may not have been in the manual, that I could teach and kind of bring to the table when I was a teacher. So I
Like
started
a
with
way
those.
to enrich the classroom experience.
1,000%. 1,000%. And so, because I wanted to be able to sink my teeth in everything that I was teaching. And so that's what I did. Even with young women, I did the Don't Miss This. There was another young women podcast. I can't put my finger on it now, but I did do that. And I would subscribe to the Redheaded Hostess and Come Follow Me, things like that. So love, teach, pray. These are just subscriptions and they would have their own little podcasts as well. But I never wanted to just read the scriptures and try to figure it out. I always wanted correlated and sometimes just things that are bolstered by the church to help me understand it and to give it to somebody else to be able to sink their teeth into it as well. So I started with those podcasts, those resources. Um, that led me to the gospel essays, which I'd heard about, but never took the time to really look at. And the first one I looked into was the Blacks in the Priesthood. So I read into that, learned some things I hadn't known before. I personally had never heard about Elijah Abel until I read that. The first Black man to get the priesthood. Learned that he had gotten the priesthood taken away from him when Brigham Young became prophet. So that was a little bit difficult for me to read. My father is ADOS. He's African descent of slavery. So um, it was difficult for me to think that this was my ancestor was given something as powerful as the priesthood and it was taken away um, just because of his skin color. So that essay made me get into the other essays. So I started reading, really, really getting into these other essays. The polygamy essay, the what was the other one I read at the time? Book of Abraham was another one. And somehow I stumbled on Mormon discussions when I was going through these other resources. And I came upon the Happiness Letter podcast and another one. And it just got me thinking, I just started really diving into certain things. And then that led me to RFM, Lindsay Hansen Park. I loved her 100 Days of Polygamy. Sorry, 100 Days of Polygamy. Loved that. I started listening to that. I listened to RFM, who I loved his take on everything because he likes to dig into it as well, like dig into the details. And I'm not someone who likes assumptions. I don't like people jumping to conclusions. So I appreciated that I didn't really know where RFM or Bill Reel was when I started listening to them. I just knew that they were things,
Topics.
taking certain topics and breaking it down. And they would always say, if you don't believe us, look at the resources yourself, look at the sources yourself. So I really gravitated towards that. And then I
Was that
came upon,
about a year ago?
sorry, that was about a year ago. So the essays I saw in November, um, and then I stumbled upon, and this was still church resource. I stumbled upon the Adam God theory, and I don't remember how or where I saw that, but it was somewhere on the website. I had just dug from the essays. I jumped to this, I jumped to that. Somehow I got to this Adam God theory with Brigham Young. And I said, what is that? And so and then I ended up seeing Bill Reel and RFM's Adam God Theory podcast, which I didn't even know when it was recorded. I just saw it on YouTube and was like, wow, that's interesting. So anyway, I still was doing both. I was doing the come follow up type podcast, the don't miss this podcast. But then I'd also watch, I found John DeLynn, Mormon Stories, and just listening to all these different people and their backgrounds. And I thought that was so interesting. And so I started watching that. I got into those podcasts, and I'm trying to think who else. Um, I have a friend, Stephen Jones. I love his podcast still. I still watch his podcast. He's a faithful member. He was a bishop. I don't know if he still is, but he has some great guests on, and I like to kind of hear their side of things. So again, I like to just hear things and dig and just kind of just get information and then figure out where we're going to end up. That's what I
That's
love
right.
to do.
There's a lot of stuff in Mormon history that is not really covered by the
Yeah.
church, and it's really, really interesting to hear it. I remember, the first time I heard about some of the issues, it
Hmm.
made the people seem more human. They
Yeah.
had to deal with reality, with real life, and they had to struggle through things. And it must have been really hard to be
Yeah.
in Missouri and to get kicked out and to have things going well in Nauvoo, and then to have some issues happen, and then the martyrdom, and
So many
all these
trials.
things, so many trials, and then like just always thinking about being a pioneer, you know,
Yeah.
pioneer children sang as they walked and walked, was always something, in my mind growing up. And it's
Yeah.
like the real experiences of people is kind of left on the cutting room floor instead of teaching about it. And so it's really nice to hear more things, and it does cause some people to question some of the teachings, and but we're all on a journey seeking the truth. That's what I say.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting because again, growing up on the East Coast, my experience was a little different, and also being coming from a convert family, right? So I don't have that pioneer lineage and that my husband has, where he heard stories growing up of different things happening, and I didn't have that. All I had was the modern day telling of what was going on. So, for example, I didn't know Joseph Smith was a polygamist until the essays. So this is well into my 30s. I did not know that. Growing up in New York, I thought it was just Brigham Young. I thought it started with Brigham Young. I was kind of told through the grapevine it was because so many men were dying while they're crossing the plains.
right?
But I
And
was
on one
never
hand,
told Joe Smith.
it makes sense that Joseph Smith would practice it. I mean, he received a
Really?
revelation.
Mm-hmm.
It would make sense. And my recollection is that I I remember in a Sunday school class being taught that um, Joseph Smith received a revelation, but he loved Emma so much that he
And he
didn't
did do it.
practice it. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until the Mormons moved to Utah and they were in their own sort of territory that they felt
Mm-hmm.
free to be able to start practicing polygamy. And for whatever reason, they kept that from the members. Could have been just for streamlining, could have been for whatever purposes.
Yeah.
Is just interesting to hear more of the story. And so, Latter Daily Digest is all about getting information out to people. It's about discovering um, creators, honoring creators, helping people maybe choose to view another podcast or another, see somebody who's written a book.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be about anything of the whole Mormon spectrum. I'm wearing a shirt right now I got from Sunstone called More Than One Way to
More
Mormon.
than one way to Mormon.
And I hold space for everyone to have to be in their own place. But Joseph Smith said to seek out all the good books in the world and all the learning that's available to us.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing to do. And for Latter Daily Digest, we're hoping to get people introduced to more and more podcasts from wherever they might be, faithful or you know other podcasts that are out there. And I've extended the offer to you in the past, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to be able to get you on as a co-host coming up really soon. And we're excited to have you. And thank you for sharing your story today. And everyone out there, hit like and subscribe so you can see more. Hopefully, we can get going so that we can actually do a daily digest into Mormon land and get things going. And I wish you the best in your searching for truth. And you have any last words for us?
No, just want to say that I really appreciate what you're doing, Jean, that you're holding a space for everybody, because as you get older, you realize there is more than one way to Mormon. And I think that it's important for everyone to know that there's a place for them, no matter where they are, somewhere on that spectrum, right? So thank you for doing this. And let's get different podcasters on so that viewers can see where they can fit in and where
All
they do
righty.
fit in.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye to everybody.
Bye,
We'll see you
guys.
later.